Alright, got a new video today. Today I want to talk about why did Michael the archangel go and retrieve the body of Moses. Now Moses died. He lived and he died in this world just like everybody else would. His body left. Now in that time, Jesus didn't crucify and resurrect. So in the Old Testament, when people died, they went into a paradise, Abraham's bosom. And that's where Moses had to have went. But it sounds there might be a special circumstance where maybe Moses never did go to the paradise. I'm not really sure. Now, we want to see why this happens. The Bible tells us why God did this. Let's read the verse here in Jude, verse 9. It says, "Yet Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses. Does not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, 'The Lord rebuke you.'" Michael's a powerful angel. And he even said, "Lord rebuke you." He didn't say, "I rebuke you." He said, "Lord rebuke you." Interesting. Do we rebuke the devil? No. We're told to resist the devil. Get away from, resist him. But don't rebuke. That's what God does, rebukes the devil. We don't rebuke the devil. We resist the devil, stay away from him. Even Michael the archangel knew not. He said, "The Lord rebuked you," not me, It's pretty interesting. Now, let's get over here to the book of Malachi. And we're going to find out a few things. It's interesting about this. Book of Malachi, if you don't know, it's actually the last Old Testament book in the Bible. And the first one is Matthew. But let's go over to the book of Malachi real quickly. And we're going to see something interesting in verse, I got it written down here, Malachi 4 through 5. It says here, let's see here, Malachi, that's Micah. Didn't look right in a second. Here we go. All right. Sometimes it takes a while to find things. Here we go. Malachi 4 through 5, it says, "Remember ye the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded unto him in Horeb for all Israel, with the statutes and judgments. Behold, I will send you Elijah, the prophet, before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord." Now, the King James Bible doesn't mix it up, but a lot of Bible versions mix up the day of the Lord and the day of Christ. The day of Christ is the rapture. The day of the Lord is the day of Armageddon. So the day of Christ is here, the rapture. The day of Armageddon is when Jesus actually returns and his armies with him to end tribulation and start into bringing the millennial kingdom. So the day of the Lord is Armageddon. The day of Christ is the rapture. And we see this. It says before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. It says before Armageddon. So we see how that is. And now we see Moses in verse 4. In verse 5, we see Elijah. So let's run over here. I want to check over here really quick at Matthew 17 real quickly. Matthew 17, we see some things here about Moses. Back 1 through 3, 17, 1 through 3. It says, "And after 6 days Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John his brother, and bringeth them up into a high mountain apart, and was transfigured before them, and his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And behold, there appeared unto him Moses and Elijah, talking with him." Now we see Moses and Elijah again. We see Moses and Elijah in Malachi chapter 4, verse 4 and 5. And we see that. And then we see here again, Matthew 17, 1 through 3, we see Moses and Elijah again. Now it's interesting because that's something that Moses could not have done. Now we know Elijah never died. Elijah was taken to heaven on a flaming chariot into heaven. And Elijah went in his own body. So that makes sense. But Moses, he died. Moses lived in this world and he died like everybody else does. His body went in the grave. But his soul, it doesn't sound like his soul did like every other person's soul that followed the law in the Old Testament. It doesn't sound that way. It sounds, I'm not saying definitively, but it sounds to me most likely the soul of Moses, when he died, he went up to heaven like we do now. Because after with the body present with the Lord, our apostle Paul says. But that wasn't the same way in the Old Testament. They went down to Abraham's bosom, or paradise, which is also called. Because they couldn't be in the presence of God because their sins weren't removed from their soul yet. It just stopped their sins. But when Jesus' blood spilled, his blood purged, removed the sins from their soul and from our soul once we believe. And trust in that blood that Jesus was sacrificed, and his sacrifice spilled his own blood and appeased the wrath of the Father in heaven. We have faith in that blood, and he died and rose again the third day, then you are saved. It's all about that blood today until tribulation. There's a different way to get saved in tribulation. It's works in tribulation. You want to get saved today, it's faith alone. in that blood. He died, rose again the third day. Now we see this. It sounds to me like maybe Moses, when he died, his body went into the grave like it does people today. It sounds like his soul might have went to heaven. Now maybe his soul went down to Abraham's bosom and then was retrieved. I don't know. But I do know for a fact that Michael the archangel was sent by God. Says God clearly said to Michael, I bet you, go down there and get the body of Moses. I got work for Moses. Well, what's the work? Well, there's works to do over here. And when we just read here at Matthew 17, we read that Moses and Elijah appeared. I don't know what they said, but I'm wondering if they said to Jesus, Lord, are we supposed to show up now? We're not sure what's going on here. Because if you read the book of in Peter, in one of Peter's books, he says that even the angels in heaven was looking down, not knowing what was going on. They were looking down like, Jesus is on earth, what's going on? Even the angels were in heaven didn't know what's going on. It's kind of watching what's going on. And clearly Moses and Elijah were in heaven, looking down from heaven saying, Jesus, what's he doing down there? And I'm not saying this, I'm just wondering if maybe their conversation with Jesus was at the Mount of Transfiguration was like, Lord, are we supposed to be here now? Because we know in future time that we've got work to do in tribulation. Because they've already clearly been given the information, but it hasn't been written yet in their time. But maybe God in heaven revealed it to them. I don't know. There's a lot of things. It's interesting. It's unanswered, but we're going to find the answer definitively. Why was Moses' body retrieved? Now, if you look at this, you clearly see that Moses was in his own body by the time he was standing before Jesus with Elijah, clearly. Because we don't know exactly when Michael, the archangel, went and retrieved the body of Moses. We don't know when it was. It was clearly before Jesus had come. Of course, that's in the Old Testament anyway. But it was sometime between when Moses died and when Jesus was born, somewhere between that time. And that could have been a couple thousand years. And things like that. Well, about 1500 or so. So we see that. Now, let's look over here to Revelation chapter 11. Revelation chapter 11 says some things. Now, a lot of people don't believe this. And that's fine. I mean, you believe what you got to believe. But I believe this is definitively tells us information. Revelation 11, 3 through 6 tells us some interesting thing about this. Here's why I believe God had Michael the archangel retrieve the body of Moses. This is why I think he did it. Revelation 11, again, 3 through 6. And I will give power unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy of 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Sackcloth. Now, in the Old Testament, people being sackcloth, they're mourning, And it says in verse 4, these are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing before God, standing before the God of the earth. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth and devoureth their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he must in that same manner be killed. These have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them into blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. Now it's interesting. A lot of people think, well, it's Elijah and Enoch. I don't believe that. It doesn't line up with Enoch. Now Enoch, in my opinion, is a type of the rapture. Because Enoch was then, just like Elijah, was in his human body, and boom, God took him out. He took him to heaven. Just like Elijah. Elijah went to heaven on a flaming chariot. So Elijah never died. He went in his body and everything. Moses did not. Moses died a natural death. But God says, I got work for Moses. Michael, go get that body. I need it. So I wonder if maybe, when Moses died naturally, his soul went to heaven, they didn't do that back then. It wasn't until after Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. Now, if you die today and you're saved, washed in the blood of Christ, then you go right to heaven. Your body stays in the ground. You get buried. Your soul goes to heaven, absent with the body, present with the Lord. But those in the Old Testament, they would go down to a paradise, Abraham's bosom, as I mentioned. But it doesn't sound like Moses even did. It doesn't sound like Moses' soul went there. Maybe it did. And when Michael retrieved the body, his soul went with the body. I don't know. But it's interesting. So we see, without a shadow of a doubt, I'm seeing that Moses and Elijah are the two witnesses in Revelation chapter 11, which is a future time from now. We know this because it says in verse 6, these have the power to shut heaven, that it rain not. And who had the power to do that? Elijah. Elijah could make it to where it wouldn't rain. So that's Elijah. It says here, and have power over waters to turn them to blood. Well, into blood and to smite the earth with all plagues. Now, who could turn water into blood and perform plagues? Well, that's Moses, of course. And clearly, Moses and Elijah are definitively the two witnesses that are going to be in tribulation. So we have to see that's why, if you read in Jude, why God took out the body of Moses and took it with him. He says, that's it. The devil's like, no, God set a rule. When someone dies, their body goes in the ground. That's what God said. Michael says, I don't know. All I'm told by God is to go get this body, and I'm not leaving without it. And that's what Michael said. That was his attitude, at least. I mean, I'm not saying he said it, but I'm saying that's his attitude. I'm not leaving without it. Kind of an attitude. But he took the body of Moses with him. Clearly, by the time Jesus was there, speaking to them on the Mount of Transfiguration in Matthew 17, clearly Moses was in his human body, just like Elijah was at that time. So he's like, now, Lord, I'm just wondering. I mean, we don't know what they're talking about. I'm kind of wondering, like, Lord, are we supposed to be here now? Because they knew they had something to do in future time. Because a lot of people are like, wait a minute. You start really seeing how this postponement theory works, which I think is a postponement fact. I do not believe for a half a second that God's done with the Jews. That's ridiculous. God's going to go back to dealing with the Jews. That's what tribulation's for. And the Jews are going to realize Jesus was their Messiah in tribulation. And a wonderful day it'll be when the Jews go back to the Lord and realize Jesus is the Messiah they were waiting for. Because, when tribulation comes, they're going to see that. But what we see here now is it's going to come back. Now, I'm wondering if most likely is Moses and Elijah will be in tribulation and say, Jesus was your Messiah, and you killed him. Go back to Jesus. That's what it sounds like Moses and Elijah, are probably going to be doing. Warning people, like, Jesus was your Messiah, and you get the 144,000 and things like that. They'll probably be going around saying, Jesus was your Messiah, telling Jews that, because what do all of them have in common? Elijah and Moses and the 144,000, they all have one thing in common. They're all Jews. And they're going to be in tribulation. And it sounds to me like they're probably going to go around and say, Jesus was your Messiah, go to Jesus. Trust in him. And then people are going to be rejecting the mark of the beast, which they should be if they go through tribulation. And they're going to love Jesus and not love their lives. And they'll say, take my head off, I love Jesus. I'm not going to take this mark of Satan. There's no way. So they're going to be doing that. But God had a plan, and God's plans, no matter what happens, God's plans always fulfill. That's all there's to it. Because God created man to say, look, I'm going to have them with me. As God says, man is made for my pleasure. It pleases God. And what pleases God? For us to do right and do good. That's a way of service. But the thing is, though, he had Adam and Eve. He said, we're going to have them in a perfect world of Eden. And then the devil came in and immediately screwed it up. And now it's a fallen world to this day. We live in a fallen, evil world. And we have to live in that. And God says, nope, I'm not going to let that happen, because that means everyone would die and go to hell. Nope, I'm going to pay for it. If you look in Genesis is an amazing book. And there's so much stuff in Genesis. But you go to Genesis chapter 3. Let me see if it's chapter 3. Yeah, chapter 3, verse 15, it says, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise his head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. That's the first prophecy in the Bible. It says this promised seed is going to show up and save you. Save us all. The promised seed is Jesus Christ. Clear back in chapter 3 of Genesis. That's how quick we as humans screwed up. And the devil came in and he completely screwed everything up on purpose. And he says, you know what? I'm going to come down here. I'm going to pay for your sins myself. Look at Abraham. He was told to take his son Isaac up and sacrifice him to God. I guarantee you, without a doubt, Abraham didn't want to do it, but he trusted God. We find out in Scripture that Abraham's like, fine, he gave me a promise. God gave me a promise. He can't lie. So if I kill my son, then God will just bring him back from the dead, and because he promised me that I would be, the father of many nations. Like, people be like, like the sand of the sea. He goes, okay, well, he'll just bring my son back to life then, because there's promises that God made, so okay. But he was going to do it. I believe Abraham was going to do it. We also love God, you know what I mean? But he was going to do it, but God says, I had no intentions of you doing it. And it says, you know, they provided a ram for that sacrifice, because they built the altar going to make a sacrifice. But we see here, he says, I will supply the sacrifice. There's a ram there, but God also really meant, I will supply the sacrifice. Myself, Jesus Christ. See, we understand what love is. People say, I feel love, sure. But love isn't a feeling, it's an action. There's no greater love than Christ dying on the cross and paying for you. He didn't have to do it. He could just sat on his throne in heaven. Ah, well, that's their own problem. But no, he says, even before the earth was created, he says, I'm going to come down here, I'm going to pay for it. Jesus did not have an easy time. Jesus was persecuted. Jesus was always people, even his own people were against him. I bet that hurt him so bad his own people were against him. And everybody just sins, just all the time. They don't care. He's telling them truths and they didn't want to listen. And the religious leaders of the time, the Pharisees, they just tried to kill him. But they did get what they wanted, but also God got what he wanted, because his plan now gets to be fulfilled by the blood of Christ that made the final sacrifice for all sins forever. He died, but you can't stop God, because God can't die. He was dead for 3 days. On the third day, he came back, because he says, I got the power to put down my life. I got the power to pick it back up again. And boy, did he ever. There's no stopping Jesus Christ. He's going to come back, and you want to see power. Jesus over here was kind and loving. Over here, you're going to see a vengeful God return. And he's going to kill. Which side you want to be on? I'm on the side of Christ, the winning side. Because my Creator loved me enough to pay for me with his own blood. I could not comprehend what Jesus felt and suffered on that cross. I couldn't comprehend it. He suffered in ways I could not even understand. But he paid it, and he paid it for you. Because we know we're leaving soon. I don't know when the rapture is. Maybe it's tomorrow. Maybe it's 100 years. I don't know. But all I know is I'm prepared. I've been washed in that blood. I am prepared. I'm ready to go. As I said before, too many people trying to set dates for the rapture. The rapture is not for setting dates. The rapture is a prophecy, a future event that tells us, God says, here's what I'm going to tell you. And I'm going to call you up and catch you up. As the King James Bible says, the pre-tribulation rapture is true. I don't know when it is. But I'm not thinking about when it is. I'm thinking about being prepared for it. Prophecy is not about setting dates. Prophecy is about being prepared. So when it does come, whenever it comes, we're prepared. How do you get prepared for the rapture? You have faith in the blood Jesus split upon the cross. God rose in the third day. It's all what Jesus did. Forget what you could do for salvation. You have nothing to do with salvation, only Jesus Christ. But I hope this video helps you, and I'll talk to you soon.